Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 96 of Humanity Rising. Since May 22nd, Ubiquity University and well over 300 partnering organizations from all over the world have come together to offer a daily open space on Zoom, starting at 5 p.m. Central European Time, so that people all over the world have the opportunity to come together to share their experiences of what it's like going through the extraordinary, unprecedented pandemic. An experience for all of humanity that has put most of us under some form of lockdown, started a new social meme of social distancing. We're all wearing masks. I'm in Paris, where the COVID rates have been going back up. So every time I step out my front door of my Airbnb here near the Bastille, I have to put a mask on. And that's being replicated worldwide, with the actual exception of the United States, which has the highest COVID rates in the world because they're not recognizing the obvious. Scientists from all over the world are telling us that this pandemic is a wake-up call, and that humanity has a very limited amount of time, only a few years, no more than till 2030, to right itself in relationship to the larger ecology, or we will surely forfeit human life as we know it. So the mission and purpose of Humanity Rising, in addition to just bringing people together to share experiences, is to provide a mechanism through which we can confer on how we can increase our strategic effectiveness and how we can begin to implement solutions at scale at this very critical moment in the human odyssey. One of the themes of the sessions for the last 96 days have been on how do we imagine a better future? How do we activate human potential at a higher level? We've talked about heart coherence. We've talked about all kinds of positive visionings of the post-pandemic world and how we can make it more sustainable and resilient and healthy, abundant, and in alignment with natural systems. And today, we're going to deepen this theme of how we understand and how we can enhance the extraordinary potential that we human beings have around the impact of intention. When one focuses one's will, when one focuses one's intention, one is harnessing arguably one of the most important and powerful forces in the world. So I'd like to now turn it over to my good friend and colleague, the Chief Innovation Officer here at Ubiquity University, Peter Merry, who has been studying these matters for a very, very long time, and will commence our program. Peter?
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, great to be back. Yeah, it's a real honor today to be able to host this dialogue with Brenda Dunne. Her work with Jahn at Princeton has been such a help to me over the years as as you do these talks about consciousness and how interconnected we are, and in terms of the challenges we're facing right now, a realization of that interconnectedness is so important if we're going to create the kind of solutions we need. It's one thing just to be talking about it in general, but when you can refer to 28 years of research done at Princeton University that demonstrated beyond statistical doubt, 1 in 3 billion, that it was chance, that our intention affects the world around us. Then people sit up and their ears prick up because they realize, oh, this isn't just some nice kind of idea. You mean science has actually researched this? And I know that that journey wasn't easy all the way. And so I'm very grateful to Brenda and Bob, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, for the work that they did there. We have. I just want to show you one slide to start with, which is the slide I use whenever I'm kind of talking about this work. That when they completed the work, they produced this DVD and CD set that has Bob's talks, has a great dialogue. And that's a picture of Bob there. I wanted to make sure that we honored him at the beginning. So there's a picture of Bob with Brenda at the start. And down at the bottom is the technology main technology that they used, and that you can actually, were certainly able to get yourself to use, and I have used with groups. And really what, the core of the experiment was, can you get the line to go higher or lower in a statistically significant way? I remember the most powerful experience I had of that was actually in a room full of 100 ethical bankers hosted by Triodos. And they were trying to get the line to move up. And the line plummeted right down to the bottom of the screen with great statistical significance. So they were definitely having an impact, but in completely the other direction that they were actually aiming for. So I don't know what that tells us about bankers, ethical or not, but it was a powerful experience for them as well. And then afterwards, they also inspired this company that unfortunately has stopped operating now, Celeron, to develop these lamps that change color under the influence of your intention. So I have one here. My kids love it. When they were younger, they could do it just like that and got bored of it, very quickly, because it's, make the lamp go red, bing. But when you do it with a group of adults, it challenges their whole mindset about the nature of reality. So we're going to start this dialogue with Brenda. Rick, if you're able to bring Brenda in as well onto the screen.
I have Brenda on the broadcast, Peter.
Oh, cool. I can only see myself at the moment for some reason, not her. Okay. Oh, there we go. So Brenda, welcome to Humanity Rising. Thank you for taking the time to share the experience that you had with PAIR and your insights from it, because I think they're so important for people to expand their understanding of the nature of reality in a way that can really challenge our traditional scientific rational perspective of how things work. So maybe just to kick us off, you could introduce yourself a bit and tell us a little bit about the story of PAIR, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies research, and how it got going, and some of the major phases in the development, maybe.
My pleasure. And Peter, thank you, and Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising for this very valuable invitation. I feel privileged to be here with you today and to be able to share a little bit of our story. Let me start off by, let me see if I can get myself onto the, well, I'll just talk to myself in the corner because I can't see myself on the screen.
Let's just check, Brenda. I can only see myself. So are you seeing me still?
Oh, come on. Well, I can see.
Peter, we're broadcasting both of you. Just
okay.
You're on a screen. I can't. That's okay. We'll manage.
I can see both of you.
Okay. Well, by way of introduction, I'm Brenda Dunne. For 28 years, I was manager of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies, or PAIR, research laboratory. which was established in 1979 by Bob Jahn. Bob at the time had been the dean of engineering at Princeton, and he was approached by an undergraduate who asked if he'd be willing to supervise an independent study in which he wanted to see if she could design and construct a random event generator and replicate the work that had been reported by physicist Helmut Schmidt, who was at the time working at Boeing Aircraft. She told him that none of her faculty were willing to support such a program. And she reminded him that when they entered as freshmen, he had told them that if they did well in their studies, they'd be able to do their independent work on any topic of their choosing. And this was the topic of her choosing. Bob at the time had really no interest in this topic, but he did have an interest from an engineering point of view, and felt that the design and construction of an electronic random event generator was a perfectly legitimate student project. So he agreed to supervise it. And he worked with the student for a year or so and was getting some rather striking and unexpected results that indicated that somehow people were able to influence the output of this random process. This was basically.
Brenda, could you just explain a little bit what a random event generator is?
Yes, indeed. I was about to. In a sense, it's an electronic coin flipper. If you just imagine flipping coins, you get 50% of the time you'd expect to get heads, 50% of the time tails. And they're going to alternate at some unpredictable sequence. So you might get 1 1 0 1 1 1 0 0 1 0, etc. Now, if you were to flip a coin 10 times, you'd expect to get about 5 heads, but you might get 6. You wouldn't be terribly impressed with 6 heads out of 10. But if you kept on flipping and you ended up with 60 heads out of 100, you'd say, that seems a bit extreme. And if you flip this coin 10,000 times and you get 5,000 heads, something's going on. Either the coin is biased or there's something else anomalous happening. And this is really what the RE did. It would generate trials a couple of feet from the machine and express and record pre-record and entails, because
You're just breaking up a little bit, Brenda.
in a very orderly manner. And then it would up the number of times it found what it was looking for. And people would attempt to try to get over 100 or under 100, depending on their stated intention. There was usually a computer screen that was displaying the results of each trial of 200 flips, either numerically as a number or in a graph that would accumulate the deviations from the expected chance mean of 100. So people would sit there and perhaps try to make the line go up or go down, or they would do a non-intention, we'd call it needless.
Brenda, if you can hear, it might help to turn off the video.
Okay, should we continue? The university was concerned that it might shed an unfortunate light on its reputation and discourage its alumni from their ongoing support. But after quite a battle, which took the better part of a year, Bob, who of course was a tenured professor, an aerospace engineer, and of course the dean of the engineering school, prevailed upon the administration under the rubric of academic freedom. And they finally agreed to let him start the program with a few caveats, and these are important. The program was not to explore or study people. We were studying the machine. We were ostensibly an engineering program with the purpose of determining whether human consciousness or emotion might be able to affect the behavior of various physical random systems. So as a result of that, we have very little that we can say formally about the people who participated in the study, although we do have some interesting anecdotal information about it, which I'll speak to a little bit in a little bit. We also could not have an educational component. We were not allowed to involve undergraduates or graduate students. Not that it stopped them from joining us from time to time. But eventually, Bob did get the program approved, and he set out to try to find somebody who could help him in the lab on a day-to-day basis and serve as its laboratory manager. Which brings us to me. At the time, I was living in the Chicago area, doing my graduate work at the University of Chicago in developmental psychology. But on the side, and in my spare time, I was doing some experiments in remote viewing, which we later came to call remote perception. And basically, we were attempting to replicate some of the reports that came out of the IEEE, out of SRI, Stanford Research Institute, that had been reported by Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ in the proceedings of the IEEE a year or two away. And we did this. We got some very interesting results. Perhaps what might be, I might share with you my own reaction to it and how I got involved. When I was still doing my undergraduate work at Mundelein College, I had a double major, one in psychology and one in the humanities. And I had to do an independent project myself for each of these programs. In the humanities program, I actually did a research paper on consciousness, particularly altered states of consciousness and what consciousness might be, and which turned out to be a very valuable background. In the psychology program, I was shown this article in the IEEE, and it was suggested, hey, why don't you try this? And I thought, well, that sounds interesting, but I have a little bit of a problem with it. In the paper, the authors had mentioned that their subjects, the people who participated, called percipients, were able to not only describe remote geographical locations that were miles away in space, but also that they were occasionally able to predict or to describe these scenes before the scenes were actually selected. And it was that precognitive aspect of it that got me really intrigued, and I must say, rather skeptical. So I decided maybe I would just try it myself and see if it worked. And I can very vividly remember this Sunday morning, and I was busy doing laundry. And as I was folding my laundry, I thought of a friend of mine and said, well, this will be easy enough. I'll just try to see where she's going to be at 5:30 and then call her later and see if she was there. And no sooner had I had that intention than I had this feeling or image, or I don't know what you want to call it, but a sense that she was walking in the woods, something that she was not usually prone to doing. If she was an outdoor person, she'd be playing tennis or riding a bike, but she wouldn't be hiking in the woods. So I kept folding my towels, and at about 20 after 5, my doorbell rang, and there was my friend outside, and she said, you know, I'm going kind of stir crazy. I thought it would be nice to get out and go for a walk in the woods. And after I picked my jaw up from the floor, I went with her, and the two of us were indeed walking in the woods together at 5:30. And that is really what prompted me to go ahead and set up a little more systematic replication of that work to see if it was just a fluke or if it really worked. And it did work, and it worked pretty well. And I was reporting on the research at a meeting of the Parapsychological Association in St. Louis. And it turns out that Bob Jahn was there, sort of scouting out the field and seeing who was who and whether there was anybody who it might be a partner in his undertaking. After I gave my very brief presentation, which by the way included several trials that we did over distances, global distances, several thousands of miles, and 24 hours ahead of time, which produced highly significant results, that some of which were very striking. This work I'll mention that later, but it was reported and it was published. And during the recess, during the break, somebody asked me to meet Bob Jahn, who'd been asking about me. And I went over to him and I said, I understand you've been looking for me. And he responded, you might say that. An exchange which I have come to recall with great fondness over the past few years in terms of the profundity of it and what we actually did when we finally did find each other. But I regress. Basically, at this meeting, Bob told me about his plans to start a program at Princeton and asked me if I would be interested, and I said, you bet. I was ready to go. I had finished all my coursework on my doctoral program. I just had to do a thesis on a topic I really didn't want to spend several years on. I had sold my house. It was really ready to move on to a new life. And so in June of Bob also had a little bit of a problem persuading the administration that it was okay to hire a psychologist to manage a laboratory in the engineering school, something they couldn't understand. But once again, he was able to persuade them that I would be able to do the job, and in fact was the best person he knew to take on that position. So in June of 1979, I moved to Princeton with my 2 children, my 2 cats and a dog, and all my household belongings. And we started this research program. The program at the time was situated in an old unused storage area next to the engineering school's machine shop. And Bob commandeered that space. We expanded it a little bit. We decorated it, we carpeted it, we put up paneling, we got some furnishings for it. And we didn't have a name for it, and we didn't even have a room number. So at the time, we decided that it might be clever to just put a Greek letter psi on the door to identify where we were. psi being a symbol for wave function, which engineers use quite frequently, also for psychology, and of course for psychic phenomena. Over the next couple of months, I had several people stand at my door staring in fear and asking me, why do I have a devil's pitchfork on my door? And I had to explain to them that it wasn't a devil's pitchfork, it was a Greek letter. But after this happened several times, and one guy was standing there staring at the door with that look, and as I approached, coming into work one morning, and I smiled at him and I said, no, it's not a devil's pitchfork, it's a Greek letter. And he just backed away in terror and said, how did you know what I was thinking? And I thought, oh my God, they think I'm crazy? So I just smiled at him and I said, well, listen, what kind of a lab do you think we're running here? And we took the psi down. We then put up one of these maps of a spiral galaxy with a little arrow that says you are here. And then one day somebody said to me, you know, that's not our galaxy. And I said, my goodness, I'd hate to have a misleading sign on the door. And tore it off and went inside and thought, I'm not the crazy one around here, but this is going to be a very interesting trip, because as a psychologist, it was pretty evident to me that people were reacting to the possibility of our program with a pretty profound, fearful reaction. And anyway, Bob and I went to lunch one day and he said, you know, we really have to have a name for the place. I was thinking about calling it the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. What do you think of that? And I said, P-E-A, pear? No, that doesn't do it for me. We can come up with something better. And he said, I don't know why. He says, pears are very nice fruits. And I said, well, let's give it a little more thought. And our lunch came and Bob said, pass the salt. And I picked up the salt shaker and realized I was holding a pewter pear, which I passed to him and said, no, we'll keep thinking about it. And after we finished eating, the waitress came by to clear the plates and said, can I interest you folks in dessert? We have some very nice fresh pear cake. At which point I said, okay, I'm not going to fight this anymore, because if I say no, I'm going to get hit with a pear on the head when we walk out. So pear it is. And we went home, or went back to the lab, that is, and put up a pear on the door, which didn't seem to bother anybody for quite a while. And that's how we became the pear laboratory. Okay. The purpose of the lab, as I said, was really to study the influence of human intention on various types of random physical processes, which is what we did. And that was really the main part of the program. But we also continued to do research in remote perception, where the main purpose was to try to develop analytical techniques that would enable us to quantify the amount of information acquired in these programs, rather than just saying, oh, that's been good, or that reminds me of this. But we developed a series of questions. At the first time it was binary, and then they became ternary. But people then could answer these questions, both the agent who was at the site and the recipient who was remotely from the site, you know, in terms of, is it indoors or outdoors? Is it colorful or not? Are there people present, and so forth? Some 30 of these descriptor questions. Over the years, we developed, probably well over a dozen types of algorithms for doing these analyses. And in the course of that, we probably conducted, if I recall correctly, it was well over close to 650 actual trials with a statistical effect that was very highly positive and far from what you'd expect if the process was based just on guessing. One interesting thing that we observed that was rather sad at first and very informative later was as the descriptor questions became more and more incisive, more and more specific, people started to answer them directly, and we had much less of a sequence of free response descriptions, which we had used at first, where people would just let their minds wander and, you know, just utter or write a stream of consciousness reaction. Now they were having what ultimately became a forced choice experiment. And the effects got weaker and weaker until at the very end, they virtually disappeared. Fortunately, we had enough trials and the effects of the earlier ones were so strong that overall the bottom line was still showed highly significant results, indicating that people could acquire information about situations and locations that were remote from them, not only in space, but in time. Going back to the human machine experiments, in addition to the random event generator based on the device that the student had first developed, we built a great big pinball machine, a random mechanical cascade that stood about 10 feet high and 6 feet wide and trickled some 9,000 little 3/4 inch marbles through a maze of 330, I believe, 330 6-inch pegs. The balls would bounce around among these pegs after being dropped from an orifice at the top and fall into an array of 19 bins at the bottom, where they would form a typical Gaussian or bell-shaped curve. And the idea in this case was to see if people could get more balls to go to the right or to the left in accordance with their intention. We had a number of other experiments as well, but I won't go into the details on them, but they involve different types of random physical processes. And we found in virtually all of them, we had results that were beyond chance, indicating that people's desire was to affect these things was having an effect. Now, I have to emphasize that the effects that we observed were very tiny. They were not big. They were not the kinds of effects that would enable you to win the lottery or enable you to levitate a table. They were tiny effects that would compound over many thousands of trials to an extent that became well beyond chance, as I mentioned with the coin flipping. None of the people who volunteered to do these experiments were superstars. Nobody claimed to have extraordinary psychic abilities. The people who were most successful were the people who were having the most fun, who kept coming back for more, and who regarded it as a form of game and a form of play. I think that was a very important component. People were having fun, and we encouraged them to. Now, one of the things that our university in its wisdom had decided to impose upon us was a restriction from the Human Subjects Committee, who said that they didn't see anything wrong with the protocols we were using, but it was important that we make sure that our subjects did not suffer, and I quote, from delusions of metaphysical capabilities. Okay. When people would come to the lab to volunteer to do some experiments, I would sit them down on this big orange couch we had, chat with them for a bit, and then point out that it was important that no matter what happened as a result of these experiments, they should not leave thinking they were God, unless, of course, they thought they were God when they came in. Well, and needless to say, this made people laugh. That was good. When they laughed, they relaxed a little bit. We had shared a joke, and I think that also was a component in the success of the experiments. I don't believe anybody left thinking they were God, but we never queried them about that. But we did try to encourage them to come back and do as many trials as they could, because we knew that the larger the database, the larger the effects sizes would compound. And indeed they did. We did some of these experiments with the random mechanical cascade or pinball machine that was lovingly called Murphy, and with the random event generator, with protocols that also looked at what happened when the operators, we did not call people subjects, they were not the subject of the study, but when the operators were, again, many miles away from the device, or many attempting their efforts many hours, sometimes even days, before or after the machines were run. And we found that there was really no statistical difference between the effects that were produced in these remote or off-time experiments than what we saw in the local experiments. We also did some experiments with more than one participant. We called these co-operator experiments, where we would have two people sharing a common intention, operating at the same time. Usually these were in the lab, although we did a few of them remotely as well. It turned out that we found a correlation that we had not really expected. When the co-operator pair were of opposite sex, their results were pretty close to chance, even if one or the other of the participants had done fairly well individually. But when the two of them were of opposite sex, the results that were produced were 2.5 times larger than what they produced alone. Most interestingly, when they were what we called a bonded couple, when they had an emotional bond with each other, they produced results that were about 7 times larger than what they were able to produce alone. Everything else was constant except this strange relationship between the participants and the devices. This was very intriguing, and I think led to some very interesting theoretical musings on Bob's and my part. What else can I tell you? I mentioned that they were all volunteers. We probably engaged, a couple of hundred people over the years. And we always encouraged them to come back and to generate as much data as they could. They typically would produce it in a session or series. Again, we saw something rather interesting that we didn't expect. Turned out that overall, when we looked at only the first series, the results were very strong in the intended directions. By the second series, they tended to reverse. And this was known, this phenomenon was known in the parapsychological terms as the decline effect. And in fact, it was seen in other fields as well, psychology and other areas. However, we didn't stop with 2 series. We encouraged people to keep going. And when they did, and if they were able to produce at least 4 or 5 series, it turned out that the trend recovered. It was never quite as strong as it had been the first time, but it was stronger than chance, and it just kept on growing. It was almost like there was a transient that took place at the beginning of these databases. Another thing that was very important was that people, when we asked people, what did you do? What worked for you? They would frequently say, I know what you're interested in is intention, And of course, we had people recording their intentions ahead of time. We had both in the computer and in logbooks. And they would do their experiments in series in sets of 3, one where they would try to get a positive effect, one where they would try for a negative going effect, and one where they did a baseline or a null effect. And after we did the co-operator experiments, we became very interested in what was going on with gender. And we were able, at the very least, to look at the database of our collection of participants in terms of whether they were men or women, and to see if there was a difference in the effects they were producing. And indeed, there was. It turned out that the male operators tended to get results that went in the directions of their intentions. Their highs were high, their lows were low, their baselines were very, very straight, virtually no variance in them. But the effects were weak. They were not that strong, but they were there. The females, on the other hand, got much stronger effects. They produced highs that were very high. They produced lows that were very high. And they produced baselines that were very high. All of these trends were beyond what chance would predict, but they were not correlated with intention directly. So this was something rather intriguing. But the other thing that we found in talking to our operators was that they would say, we know that what you're really looking for is an effective intention, but you know, there's more to it than intention. I have to feel a bond with the machine. It has to be, I have to have a feeling. It has to be meaningful. I have to feel as if the machine is an extension of myself. Almost like, you know, when you play a musical instrument or you drive a car. I have to create that bond with the machine, which I think was an important component of encouraging them to have fun. And as we thought about that, we said, well, you know, it's one thing to state an intention and record it ahead of time, etc. But one cannot determine an emotional feeling in such a controlled fashion. So what we did was we developed these little portable random event generators that could attach to a palm top computer. And we would take those devices out into the field, into different environments. We call this part of the program. And on the other hand, we were looking for something that might resemble a field effect. And indeed, we found that when the devices were run, unbeknownst to the people involved in the environment, in groups of people who were sharing an emotional experience. Oh, they might be religious, they might be having a party, and the machine was just be running automatically in the background. We also ran it in what we term mundane when the environments were emotionally charged, when people were all kind of on the same wavelength, so to speak, the random event generator was too, and was producing effects beyond chance. When it was run in mundane situations, nothing happened. We just got random output.
Brenda, can we just pause there for a sec on that? Because a few times you've said it's like when there are couples who had a bond, when there were collectives who were aligned emotionally, that there seemed to be a bigger effect. Part of during this series, we've been working with heart math people. I don't know if you're familiar with their work. That there seems to be something related to the heart, electromagnetic fields as it were, that it generates and therefore influence that it's more likely to have. Could you say that a lot of the correlations might have been more around when people were accessing more the heart base than the mind base in terms of?
Absolutely. That, of course, was the point of these experiments. Whether emotion, whether feeling was as important as intention. And we came to the conclusion that what went on in these phenomena was some kind of a complementarity between intentionality and resonance. You couldn't say love in the scientific world, but you could talk about resonance. But affect, emotional bonds, whether it's the bond between the human and the machine, the bond among a group of people. But one thing that was not consistent with what you reported or just mentioned about the heart math work is that these effects were not electromagnetic in nature. If they were, you wouldn't get similar results from a distance or over time. There is no electromagnetic or indeed any physical force that is known that is not susceptible to this reduction in effect over time and space. And that's very important. In fact, we came to realize pretty early on that while we thought we were studying intention and the results or the effects on engineering systems, that we were indeed looking at something much more profound than that. We were looking at human consciousness. We were looking at how the human mind, not necessarily the brain, because once again, the brain could be thousands of miles away. That didn't matter. But something was going on. There was a connection, a heart connection for sure, an emotional connection that seemed to play an important part, just as important as the intentionality. It was almost as if the intentionality set the direction of the effect and the emotion set the amplitude of the effect.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say, because in the kind of practices around intention, they say you upload the intention, which is the information, as it were, and we know that the information exists outside of time and space, so that could be global.
Right.
But when you give it the attention of, let's say, the heart energy, and you actually feel what it would be like for your intention to have manifested, so you feel the joy or the excitement of whatever it is, that's a real precondition of, say, increasing the likelihood of that intention actually manifesting. So like you say, the kind of heart energy, the amplification, and the intention being the directionality.
Yeah, well, when we did the gender study, and we were looking at the difference between male and female performance, we really became very intrigued on what in the world could this all mean? Why would there be a difference based on your gender? And we did a lot of research into all of the gender studies or gender difference studies in the psychology literature, in the sociology, et cetera, et cetera. We discovered that there were basically only two effects that were robust enough that they could be repeated again and again. And those were that men were better than women at directionality, at orientation in space. Women, on the other hand, were better than men at communication and relationships. Well, said I, that's interesting. I think we have now discovered the answer to that age-old much. But this was interesting. It really got us thinking about the possibility that what we were looking at was not a physical effect, because nothing that we knew in the world of physics could explain the lack of attenuation with distance and time. Nothing. And in the psychological realm, there was nothing that could approach an explanation of these phenomena. But then we said, you know, there's one other area that we share, not only with each other, besides our laboratory. Do you find a random physical system that over the course of many hundreds or thousands or millions of trials can actually skew a random, a Gaussian distribution? And
Brenda, it's breaking up again a little bit.
oh dear, that was an
Yeah.
important.
Try turning the video off and see if that helps for a moment.
Okay, are we back now?
Yeah. So try saying the thing that you said was important. You'll need to say that again.
We found ourselves wondering if we might be looking at a biological process and asking the question of whether consciousness might be the life force in biology. Subtitle.
Brenda, it broke again just as you started to say the word consciousness. Try for maybe, yeah, right. Maybe if you just turn the video off for a second and try saying that again. Let's see if it works with. Let's see if that helps with the bandwidth.
Okay, her video's off, Pete.
Sorry?
Her video is off.
Yeah. Brenda, you still there?
Her microphone's open.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, try if you keep the video off while you're talking, it might help with the bandwidth your end. Yeah, that's right. No, you had it off just now.
Here, I can turn it off, Peter. I'll do it.
Okay. I'm getting nervous about using the word C-O-N, etc.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's go back to the, that what you were saying there, because that was important.
Says you can't start.
Okay, we can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. The question that came to mind was whether consciousness had something to do with the life force. And as I said, we wrote an essay and then published an anthology called Being in Biology, 14 essays by different authors on whether consciousness might be associated with the life force. Bob and I came to regard consciousness, if I might use the word, as not something that emanates from the brain, but as some primordial organizing principle, something on a huge spectrum, almost if you think in terms of yin and yang, as yin being what William James referred to as the aboriginal sensible muchness, and consciousness as the yang, which organizes the material that emerges in this aboriginal sensible muchness into something that is meaningful. And that word meaningful is a very important one. Meaning has two aspects also. There has to be an intention and there has to be a feeling, an emotion. So we've been thinking along these lines. The heart, of course, is the center of our emotions. The brain is the center of our cognition. But those are only part of the us, the usness thyness that is somehow a reflection of this cosmic consciousness, or this cosmic yin-yang dance that is reflected in us as a facet of a great jewel. So we can, in some respects, have some small effect on the organization of the physical world, but only a very tiny effect, but a very real effect nonetheless. But collectively, we can have a stronger effect. And we used to have a little card up on the laboratory wall, a little cartoon that said, if we all work together, we can totally disrupt the system. And that perhaps is a message that becomes relevant these days.
Yeah. Were the results that you got when there was collective emotional alignment greater than the sum of the parts?
Yes, very much so. In fact, Roger Nelson, who was a member of our pair staff for many years, started a program of his own that he called the Global Consciousness Network. That's available online. I think his website is Gaia Mind, GAIA mind.org, in which he has random event generators situated in dozens of places all around the planet. And he looks at the output of these devices at times when there is a great collective emotional surge going on. It might be a negative one, such as the destruction of the Twin Towers at 9/11, or it might be a positive one, celebrating in the US the election of Barack Obama, for one thing. But parties or New Year's celebrations. And he is finding some very striking results, extraordinarily significant, that are correlated with emotionally charged events around the world, where there are so many people drawn together into a common field, if you will, of consciousness, sharing a common desire or experience or emotion. And that does seem to be reflected in the way the outputs of these various random event generators become less variant. They become a little bit more organized in their outputs. Anyway, I mean, I encourage people to check that out.
Can you just say a little bit more about, when you sit back and you reflect on the experiments and the outcomes that you got, how did it affect your worldview? I mean, how do you, based on those results, how would you describe the nature of reality now?
Wow. It certainly has affected it. One very important lesson was that one needs to take responsibility for, I think my camera just went off.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, it is, but that's fine. We can hear you fine. It's
Okay.
good without the camera because you don't break up anymore.
Okay. One needs to take responsibility not only for one's acts, but also for one's feelings and one's intentions, because they matter. They do have an effect, even if it's a very small effect, but that effect compounded with the effects coming from many other people can make a big difference. And of course, another thing is coming to accept the fact that we do make a difference. We are not just some random speck of nothingness floating around, in a physical domain, and then we blink out at the end. But that we have a purpose, that we are reflections of some greater mind or consciousness that works through us.
Oh, she used the C word again. That's broke it up. Are you there, Brenda?
Vegetable, possibly even mineral. I'm totally persuaded that animals and plants have a consciousness of their own. They don't think in the same terms we do. They respond differently. They sense the environments differently, but they certainly do think and sense. I had an experience just today, or actually a couple of experiences. I have a little pond in my backyard in which I had some koi swimming around. And I guess it was now over a month ago, one day I looked out the window and there was a great blue heron standing at the side of my pond. And I had never seen, I have bird feeders, but those, herons aren't what I have in mind when I put out bird feeders. And I discovered that over the next week or so, I did not see any fish. And I just assumed that the heron had eaten all of them. And I became rather depressed about this. And then later, maybe it took a couple of weeks, I gradually started spotting them again. They had obviously been there, but had hidden. When they saw the heron probably did get a couple of them, but it didn't get them all. And I was delighted to have them back. They were doing very well. Yesterday, I went out to feed them, no fish. And I thought, oh my, the heron's been back. And I went out several times. I put food out, no fish. And I became rather depressed about that because I had grown rather fond of them. This morning, I went out to check, and lo and behold, I saw at least 4 of the 7 fish. There might have been a 5th, maybe others. Okay, these fish had hidden. They knew there was a danger, maybe a danger that took one of their members, and they knew to hide, and they knew to stay hidden, even when I came out and stood at the side of the pond, looking somewhat to them like a heron. But they sensed a danger, and they were able to protect themselves from it. Now, don't tell me there's no consciousness. Mm-hmm. Those fish knew what they were doing, and they were showing a certain survival instinct and wisdom in the way that they reacted to this threat. I was impressed by that.
Mm. Just on the kind of implications and the view of the world that you were talking about, I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the experiments you did with time and what it suggests to us about the linearity or non-linearity of time.
The linearity of time is a problem that has troubled me ever since I was a kid. When they first came out with this idea of analog clocks and analog watches, I had grown up with, digital clocks and watches. I had grown up with the concept of analog clocks where time was cyclical. It repeated itself. It went around and around, which made sense to me. But nowadays, we don't do much in the way of thinking of time analogically. We think of it as being linear. Most mystical traditions think of time as cyclical. Mm. The eternal return, the repetition, the renewal of the world. I believe in that. I think we've gotten way off base in our connection with nature in thinking of time as being linear, as moving in one direction. It leads us to a point where we've developed, maybe we've always had, but certainly in our culture in the West, a fear of death, because death is the end. Poof, it's over. That's a frightening thought to most people. When I think of time as cyclical, death is not a problem. It's just, moving on to another chapter. I'm trading in this body the way I might trade in a car after, it's done its mileage and getting a new one. But it no longer becomes frightening. And that, I think, is a very valuable insight and a very valuable lesson to learn. It may be the most valuable lesson. So we're here, there's a purpose. This purpose is somehow tied up with the fact that we are biological living beings. And somehow that biological process is cyclical. It repeats itself. It does not end. It just renews.
And as I understand it, Brenda, the research experiments that you did with time really created results that couldn't be explained by a linear unidirectional time, right?
No, well, another very useful and exciting part of our pair dialogue, Bob's and mine, was looking at possible explanations for the phenomena we were observing. How do you account for these things if you no longer have a physical time and space that can control it? And at one point we came across a wonderful quote from Albert Einstein to the effect that time and space are simply cognitive constructs that keeps everything from happening all at once. Maybe time and distance are not properties of the physical world, but properties of consciousness. They serve an organizing principle. And if time and space are properties of consciousness, then by definition, any physical theory is a construction of consciousness and therefore can reflect the consciousness that is doing the observing as that which the consciousness is observing. In other words, we looked at all of the various principles of quantum mechanics and came to realize that every one of them bore a metaphysical, yes, but also a metaphorical relationship to subjective experience. So especially the Bohr's concept of complementarity, which is at the root of the yin-yang dynamic. He pointed out that opposites are complementary. That is, it isn't a question of either or, but both and. So you now have this complementary relationship between subjectivity and objectivity, intention and emotion, yin and yang, the physical world and the subjective world. We create the models. Any kind of theorizing is a process of consciousness. So it has to reflect the consciousness as much as what it's theorizing about. We had some fun with this, and it became a very stimulating. Well, we used to use it to describe our moods. Just to give you a few examples, mass, okay? We will say things like, boy, that's heavy, or he's a lightweight. Charge, oh, so excited. Oh boy, that turns me off. And so forth. I mean, you can go through that, mass. Man, that's heavy. I think I used that one already. Distance. Wow, that idea is really far out, or that's very close to my heart. You can go through these one by one and find that there are these metaphorical relationships that are telling you that all of these physical concepts are drawn from the world of subjectivity. Consciousness is drawing from experience. It's applying its organizing principle in describing the world it's observing. It doesn't describe the physical world. It describes our attempt to represent that physical world. And that's why we're so good at language.
On that, I've been reading the Bowman Krishnamurti dialogues, and they make a distinction between what they call chronological or physical time and psychological time. And they say, we're not questioning the fact that there is, the universe has evolved, let's say, over time. The question is how we choose to relate to time, and that they call psychological time. So whereas kind of in hunter-gatherer phases, as it were, we related to time as cyclical, as you said. And in fact, I was reading just recently that in the Hopi language, there is no structure in language for past and future. It's all kind of language of the present. And then when we moved into the next phases, as it were, development, that's when the linearity came in. So that's about and as that emerged, we basically our thought, rational thought and abstract thought emerged at the same time with it, and spent most of its time worrying about the future or concerned about the past and taking us out of the present. So that distinction, because somebody said in the chat, surely time exists. Or if we make a distinction between chronological or physical time and psychological time, like Bowman Krishnamurti, and the psychological time is really about our relationship to the chronological time, as it were.
If I might share an amusing anecdote, some years ago, Bob and I were at a conference with a whole bunch of physicists, and during the banquet, we were seated at a table with a group of them, and there were two guys talking about this current concern about is time retroactive?
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the equations that are used to represent time can go forward or backward, and you just have to change a sign or something similar. And one of them said to the other one, we've really got this problem pinned down. There's just one problem we've got to get rid of. And the other one said, what's that? And the first guy said, now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I turned to a friend of mine and said, they're joking. Of course, he said, oh, no, they don't joke.
The way I've thought about it is that, in a way, what we talk about as future is really something in the subtle fields in the present that's information that's coming into form but hasn't yet formed yet. And so if we're picking something up about the future, inverted commas, what we're really doing is picking up a probability that exists in the information fields in the present that may be coming into form. It's a probability it's going to come into form, but is not yet certain yet. And then when we upload an intention charged with the emotional energy of the attention, then that increases that pattern in the field, as it were, the probability, like the directionality amplified. What you're really doing is really increasing coherence between waves in those fields until they potentially ultimately click in as standing waves into the manifest world that we can actually see.
Well, very well put. I always used to, I still do think, when I remember something, it's hard for me to recall whether it was something that actually happened or something I heard about or something I read about or a movie I saw. And the same thing with the future. There's a probability, an uncertainty that comes with distance in time, past or future, that it is not as clear. A lot of people have assumed that what we saw in our experiments were the expressions of some kind of energy that people were sending out, probably from their brain, which is not the case. That was physically affecting the fall of the balls, so the electrons going through a diode. But we were not affecting the device directly. We were affecting the probabilities that were there. The probability of a coin flip is 0.5. Okay? But maybe it could be 0.51 or 0.49. Somehow, just you put it so well, as more attention or meaning is applied to an experience, that probability becomes a standing wave, and lo and behold, you have a quote reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're coming towards the end now, and we're going to have to wrap up. I'm sure we could keep going for ages. So is there, just before we do, are there any last, few things you'd want to share? Maybe, I had a question around, so you've done all this research. Bob says, at the end of the DVD, we've proven beyond statistical doubt that, humans can impact the randomness around them. And then he says, up to you to work out the implications. If people were interested in this work, what do you see as being either the research or the work, needed to be done next to take it forward, to build on what you did over all those years?
I think, or I should say we think, that science itself needs to expand. Right now, it tends to be very deterministic. It tends to be very, quote, objective, which it's not, because it's a process of consciousness to start with. Somehow science needs to expand to allow a role in reality for consciousness as an active, proactive process. We spoke of it as developing a science of the subjective, a broader science based on complementarity rather than duality. That I think would open up all kinds of possibilities for new areas of investigation and new understanding, and indeed more meaning in the world for ourselves.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Well, it's like, it reminds me in Bohm and Krishnamurti, they talk about the problem being getting into the observer observed, or the subject object, and forgetting that actually it's all intersubjective, it's all interconnected. There's a relationship between all of them, and the moment that we imagine that the subject is separate from the object, that's when we get into trouble. That's when we can cause harm to the other, as it were, because we've forgotten that we're actually in relationship to it.
That's what leads us to the problems that we're facing in the world today.
Yeah.
And hopefully it will lead us into a closer connection with each other, even though we are physically distant.
Yeah.
It gives us time to reflect on who we are, where we're going, what we want, and what is meaningful to us.
Yeah. If anything, what the research has shown us is that we are indeed all interconnected, if not directly in this physical realm, certainly at another level.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us today. Before I hand back to Jim, just to share, something where you can get a bit more information, some things that are coming up. So that's the website when they completed the work at Pear, which Brenda actually said to me earlier, it wasn't because the university closed them down. Princeton, it's because they felt they'd had enough, basically.
Well, also because Bob was ready to retire.
Right.
And we were tired of the constraints that we were having to work under. And that was when we formed ICRL, or the International Consciousness Research Laboratories, which if I may put in a plug, one of its activities is the ICRL Press. And you can find that on our website. We have published 17 books that deal in one way or another with the relationships among science, spirit, and subjectivity and consciousness, that is. So I commend to your viewers that they check that out and look at some of our books, because they're all, in fact, our Pear work was described in detail in 2 books, one called Margins of Reality, The Role of Consciousness in the Physical World, and one called Consciousness and the Source of Reality, The Pear Odyssey.
Yeah, I've read both of those and can highly recommend them. And what was so beautiful in it all, Brenda, is the quality of relationship that you and Bob had, the 2 different roles that you had, and the dance that you had together. I mean, really made it what it was, I think, and the success that it was.
Absolutely. We were a molecule, or in other senses, in the complementary sense, Bob was a particle and I was a wave. But it was a beautiful dynamic. I miss him dearly, but on the other hand, he's still with me, and I think he was with me today. So on behalf of both of us, thank you for the opportunity to share some of this with you and with all of you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. A couple of other things to point out. So through Ubiquity, I'm running this course, the Introduction to Energetics, which for people who are interested in getting into some of the basics and exploring, you know, what this all means. It's a 4-week course. You can do it any time at your own pace if you want. But we're also doing a live version starting on November the 6th, which means every week there'll be a live webinar, or actually a live discussion that I'll be hosting to discuss the material that people have been through each week. And then very exciting, in May next year, we're going to have an event at Broughton Hall in the UK. Some of you may remember the talk on Centers of Light with Roger and Paris at Broughton. So we're going to host an event there on science and consciousness that Brenda is going to attend, and a number of others. And what we are planning at the moment and in the process of arranging is the shipment of all the equipment that they used at the Princeton lab across the Broughton Hall, where we're going to establish an experience center for people to be able to actually, the public to be able to go in and experience for themselves what happens as their mind influences these different activities or experiments around, including you know, we've been so short of time, Brenda hasn't been able to talk about a number of these, but there's one which has a drum with a random event generator connected to it. So you can affect the rhythm of the drum through your mind. There's a little robot they created. You can affect the movements of the robot. So a place that makes it hard for people to deny that they're interconnected with the rest of the world. It's going to be a cool event too. So thank you again, Brenda, and handing back to you, Jim.
Wow, thank you, Brenda. I'm still chuckling from your story of the two scientists at the banquet. We've just got one little thing we got to get rid of. What's that? Now. In order for the equations to work, they had to get rid of the only thing that exists. That was brilliant. That is brilliant, brilliant story. It sums up the conundrum of science and points the way forward. So thank you so much for that. That was wonderful. I'd love to hear your story and the conclusions that you draw are not only intuitively correct to the sensing person, but correspond to the latest researches of physics and cosmology, that we're in an interconnected whole, a single feedback loop that's sharing information every second from every node to the entire universe. And so David Bohm's implicate order has proven to be correct, and you describe it just beautifully and profoundly. So I just want to honor you and thank you, Peter, for all the research Peter's been doing over the years. So Peter himself has become rather an expert on these matters and developing the energetics of art and coordinating between Brenda and Broughton Hall, and we have a wonderful partnership that's beginning to emerge. And we hope to continue this theme, Brenda, and to have you back again down the road as we continue to explore how human beings can enhance their potential at this critical time. Tomorrow, we're going to do a variation of this theme. We're inviting Dr. Kylene Asbo, who is an expert in the Western contemplative tradition. And she's going to explore the ancient philosopher Pythagoras and the medieval mystic Hildegard de Bingen, to look for strands of awareness and harmony of the spheres, as Pythagoras put it, that can form us and inspire us today, as we're going through this extraordinary pandemic, and feeling, I would say, acute, chronically acute duress as this pandemic continues to be present in all of our lives. So we'll meet again tomorrow, beginning at 5 o'clock to around 6:30 p.m. Central European time. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Peter. This has been splendid. And we'll see everybody again tomorrow. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.